Surgery in Kanimbody block. And she also got the Dr. G. Venkataswamy Gold Medal Award by the National Board of Examination for highest mark in ophthalmology. And C.K. Kumaraswamy first birthday commemoration gold medal in MS ophthalmology. And also she won the Ebenezer Prize for the best outgoing student in CMC in the diploma in ophthalmology. And she's going to speak to us on occupational eye injuries and management. Over to Dr. Padma Pal.
Good evening, everybody. I'd like to thank the organizers for giving this opportunity to me to firstly educate myself. I am from an ophthalmology background, slowly trying to do some public eye health, and I hope to share some things that I've learned with you. The objectives being that we identify the potential occupational eye injuries, potentially hazardous areas, identify the hazards, set up the surveillance systems, make sure that we know what personal protective equipment we need, make sure we have the engineering checks, the awareness capsules, and finally, an eye safety policy. Why should we look at eye hazards? It could be something as simple as just absenteeism from conjunctivitis. It could be a radiation-induced cataract, but it could also be potentially blinding and perhaps life-threatening when it comes to blood-borne virus splashes. I have a small request from everybody present in the audience today. Just ask yourself if there are any work-related eye injuries in your department or your work area. If so, what are they? Can it be reduced? And do the healthcare workers working in your area have the personal protective equipment that they require? And finally, do you have an eye safety policy? 3 to 4% of all occupational injuries are eye injuries, as shown in some studies. The usual classification system points to foreign bodies or missiles, radiation hazard, laser-induced damage, and thermal hazards as physical, chemical hazards, biological hazards in the form of infections or body fluid splashes, and the ubiquitously present eye strain with all of us using computers today. I have just taken some examples to illustrate these hazards. A dental department is exposed to not just aerosol splashes of saliva and blood, but also flying debris. You might have had a dental procedure at some point in your life when they either use a drill or just clean your scales. In one study done in UK, up to 10% of occupational injuries in a dental setup were from eye injuries. And alarmingly so, the rate of using eye protective devices was only 57%, considering that eye injuries are so common. Back home in my own backyard, an optical shop where a person grinds lenses and fits them, you can see that I am very myopic. He's using eye goggles, but he has missiles of broken glass flying off. He does not have gloves. He does not have other equipment that should protect the rest of his body. We also have a lot of engineering, maintenance, and non-clinical support services always happening around the hospital, which then brings us to the subject of other hazards that can happen which are not specific to healthcare. And we have to make sure that all other controls are in place, whether they are machine guards, welding curtains, or off-limit areas for administrative controls. Very often in CMC, you will find something or the other is either being broken down or constructed. And it's a nightmare for an ophthalmologist to walk by to see people painting surfaces with lime and not wearing anything. I have just put this electromagnetic spectrum up to say that both the ionizing radiation end and the visible and the infrared ends can cause hazards to the eye. It has been spoken in great length about the radiation exposure in the various departments in our hospital. Just to tell you that the optical lens epithelium is only less sensitive to the reproductive cells and probably more sensitive than the brain cells. It was thought for a long time, and probably still in some parts of literature, that it is a deterministic effect, which means there's a threshold dose, But more and more, they're finding that there may be no threshold. It may be a linear association that leads to formation of cataracts. The dose has been mentioned earlier. The most common presentation is a posterior subcapsular cataract. The risk for interventional cardiologists has been highlighted earlier in the day and has also been done in another study in Malaysia, where they have been found to be at 5 times higher risk, and 1 in 2 interventional cardiologists, at least in this study, had developed a radiation-induced cataract. So what does one do? We make sure that the personal protective equipment is always in place, whether it is a short exposure or a chronic exposure. Dose monitoring is done, and as shown earlier, that the lead shields are in place in areas like nuclear medicine. Once it comes to us, all we know to do is to operate on the cataract and put an intraocular lens in. Coming to laser-induced hazards, which is more relevant to us in ophthalmology and them in dermatology. The usual non-beam hazards are electrical, explosion, compressed gases, those with dyes and solvents, and fire. But the beam hazards are the ones we need to watch out for. As shown in the cartoon, it's better to know what you're dealing with than find out after the patient has been harmed or the health worker has been harmed. The American National Standards Institute, for every laser that is being used in healthcare today, specifies what is the maximum permissible exposure, which is the power, nominal ocular hazard distance, which is the distance within which the beyond which the maximal permissible exposure will not harm you, and the nominal hazard zone within which even the energy is more than the maximal permissible exposure. This is just to highlight that much of the laser that's used in healthcare today is in the visible end of the spectrum and the infrared part of the spectrum, and there are multiple departments which use lasers for treating patients. Most of the effects that happen with lasers in ophthalmology, meaning the eye effects, are either photochemical or thermal retinal injury. Milder ones can cause photokeratitis, and the most dreadful ones are the retinal burns. Photokeratitis is very similar to what welders see. The simple treatment for it is to put tear substitutes and rest to the eye, but the more sight-threatening ones are foveal burns, which can even cause macular holes or retinal hemorrhages. Systemic steroids have been used, but the scarring can lead to irreversible visual loss. Coming to the factors that affect whether or not laser will induce eye damage, one dictum is never, under any circumstances, look into any laser beam, because that is asking for trouble. Some lasers do not do harm in any other ways, but there are others which can cause reflection, either specular or diffuse. A duration of less than 0.25 seconds is usually safe, because that's when the blink response happens. Without knowing, you will close your eye and that way protect yourself. And the classification of lasers into 1, 2, 3, and 4 happens on the basis of whether it causes direct, specular, or diffuse injury. The good news is the most hazardous one is restricted to research spaces, but that means they have to be made more safe. And most of the medical lasers are in the class 3 group. If there is a class 4 laser or a class 3B laser, a laser safety officer becomes mandatory. A commonly asked question is, are laser pointers safe? Cheap is not always the best. There are some lasers which have come in, laser pointers which are inexpensive, but use output powers which can be similar to the radiance of directly looked at sunlight. And therefore, it is safest if you use laser pointers near 550 nanometers, which have less than 1 milliwatts, and in that case, they are safe. So what does one do for laser retinal injury? Make sure that you know your machines, have good engineering controls, avoid direct viewing, make sure all the warning signs are in place. My boss in ophthalmology had a sign which says, trespassers will be burnt, which is as bad as that. Management is usually either steroids or surgery. Thermal hazards are restricted to, usually from the Central Sterilization or Supplies Department, and they are quite similar to the chemical burns, and so I will deal with the management together. Some of the chemical hazards have been dealt with in detail. vulnerable areas have been already mapped in this hospital and usually contribute to a lot of the work-related injuries that come to the hospital emergency departments. What is alarming is it can be potentially blinding in 1 in 5 patients. And if you do have a severe burn, as shown in the picture, only about 15% get back any form of functional vision. Alkalis are worse than acids. As an example, the Department of Anatomy has people always dealing with formalin, and there are various points at which they can be injured, right from transferring it from the big container to the dilution, and not to mention when they transfer large bodies into and out of the tanks. So what is the first aid that we have to make sure they do? Please remember that irrigation is the most important thing, and for at least 15 to 20 minutes. And the right procedure is to use, if it's possible, a sterile solution, which can be sterile balanced salt or ringer lactate. But if nothing is available, water is fine. And it's nice to have someone hold the eyes open for you while this is being done. And following this, it's best to send this patient on, whether it's a health worker or a patient, to an ophthalmologist to assess the damage and treat medically either with steroids, cycloplegics, antibiotics, and in some cases, vitamin C. Extensive loss of limbal stem cells will require surgery and prolonged care and no assurance of visual recovery. Biological hazards are plenty. Conjunctivitis has plagued many of us in this room, and it keeps coming back, which is what is difficult. Bloodborne viruses, we will come to that in a minute, are not as hazardous, or at least not being reported as often in literature. The mode of introduction to the eye is either through fomites, directly, or touching the eyes with contaminated fingers, as we may see in labs. Adenovirus is a commonly implicated organism, and high-risk areas are the staff clinics and eye hospital. We are familiar with the signs. In some situations where the vision is affected or there's a very severe form, we do use steroids to mitigate the symptoms. The only way to prevent this is by making sure that we are obsessive about hand washing. And believe me, if you are obsessive about sterilium use after that, you can even restrict it from going to the next eye, forget the next person around you. And often in CMC, you will not be given leave saying that, you know what, you protect yourself and make sure you go back to work. Preventive aspects of conjunctivitis are not to be taken lightly because of the epidemic potential that they have, and it can also delay treatment in cases where the health worker has been affected by keeping on transmitting it to other healthcare workers in the system. Body fluid splashes have now been, there have been case reports coming in where body fluid splashes into the eye have been found to cause HIV and hepatitis B. This is very, very rare, but nevertheless, it's not negligible. What does one do in this instance? It's again about irrigating the eye well and passing this person on to the staff students health services where a risk assessment is done and prophylaxis given. All of us have faced eye strain by using the computer. Microscopes are also implicated. Prevention is by ergonomics, taking frequent breaks, and if it's inevitable, tear substitutes. One word of caution about eye protective devices. Any goggle is not all right. It has to be specific for the hazard that you're looking at. A missile sort of hazard where you see in orthopedics or in dental, you will need something called a Z87 device, personal protective device, which has been tested for shatterproofing. A SARS sort of situation needs a full face respirator. And if it's like a welding injury, you use a welding face shield. Some more things that we definitely should remember: do not rub your eyes when you suspect that some debris has gone in. Do not irrigate if you're suspecting a perforation of the eye or a foreign body. And do not think that wearing ordinary prescription glasses or sunglasses or contact lenses can replace protective eyewear. If you're not using your prescriptions to do the job, you are at a higher risk to obtain some form of injury. So, friends, we have to make sure that we make an eye safety policy for each of our areas, which includes what is the appropriate protective equipment, how are you going to enforce this? For example, right, 1 day sick leave perhaps. How do you get help if there is a problem? How are we going to report this, and how will we rectify the lapse, if any? We have to break this vicious cycle. It's most important to start monitoring. This is where we are at, where we have to slowly collect information in our own institution about the acute and chronic injuries that we may be facing. The future plans is to do a detailed eye hazard assessment in all areas in the hospital, make sure that we make awareness capsules before an epidemic of conjunctivitis, have them included in the mandatory staff training modules, set up the surveillance systems, and do a baseline evaluation of departments with a radiation risk for cataract.